Not Normal, a story about deep infiltrating endometriosis by Allison. My periods were always painful starting at the age of 12. I asked doctors and friends about what seemed and felt like dying with each cycle, but my periods were really light and people who menstruated all told me painful periods are normal. Painful periods are not normal. My health is complicated. As a teenager, I discovered toxic levels of a pesticide known as dieldrin in my childhood home in the well water. I thought this could explain the unexplainable period pains. I thought it was my fault for not trying hard enough, or missing yoga, or eating sugar, or staying up too late, or being too stressed. What did I do this time to cause so much pain before, during, and after my period? I always tried to work twice as hard, but I struggled to keep up, to wear pants, to succeed in school, with painful sex, simple movements, and unpredictable symptoms. I was physically and emotionally sensitive to everything. I would not listen to myself. I knew my periods were weird, but dozens of doctors cited stress and said I was overreacting. They prescribed birth control that set my symptoms on fire. As time passed, my daily symptoms waxed and waned. One day, I had to take the morning after pill, and shortly after that, a doctor forced me into receiving a shot of birth control. My health, especially my digestion, spiraled out of control. Coworkers accused me of having an eating disorder. I lost 2 jobs when I asked for accommodations for my stabbing bladder and painfully twisting intestines. I got a new job, but started fainting in my office or losing control of my bladder as I tried to find parking or make the long walk to the bathroom. My butt felt like it was covered in shards of glass, dripping in acid. My heart was unsteady. I could not breathe. Every joint in my body felt like it was snapping. I didn't have the words to say, "My periods are killing me." I had a colonoscopy that found something that seemed like maybe Crohn's disease, and I started taking steroids. Eventually, I was misdiagnosed with Crohn's disease when an MRI showed thickened bowel walls and also a very small ovarian cyst. I started taking Entyvio infusions and more steroids. With each infusion, I insisted something is wrong. My periods are getting much worse. This is not right. I went to a new gynecologist who refused to help me unless I considered taking birth control for a 5th time. She sent me on a wild goose chase for breast cancer and wrote in my medical notes, "Patient is anxiously convinced she has another disease," and recommended a psych evaluation. I had already been in behavioral therapy for about a decade, partly due to the trauma and gaslighting of living with a disease that had no known name. After about a year of invasive testing, the doctors finally said I probably did not have Crohn's disease and cast me out of their clinic. I started with a new gastrointestinal specialist who diagnosed me with inflammatory bowel syndrome and dyssynergia, when muscles in your pelvic floor become uncoordinated. She prescribed pelvic physical therapy and also sent me on a marathon to see every type of specialist with more invasive testing, including the inflation of a water balloon in my rectum as I screamed for mercy. "There's something in there. Please stop." My blood pressure was unstable. I had shivers, night sweats, constant bowel and bladder problems, fainted every night, stabbing punching pain, extreme fatigue, headaches, and I could not eat solid foods or walk or bend or leave the house day after day. Honestly, I prayed for the relief of death while my family said it was just a convenient excuse to not work. None of the doctors or their tests could explain so many different symptoms, but this is where the story gets good. That's when I got a phone call that changed my life. there was an opening on the months-long waitlist to see a pelvic physical therapist if I could make it to the hospital in an hour for an evaluation. The evaluation took about 2 hours. I didn't realize I had been disassociating from the pain in my pelvis for years, but the exam brought everything to light. I had been asking doctors about my periods since my first cycle. The therapist asked me how I would describe my periods. I said excruciating. She asked me if I had heard of endometriosis. I had not. Endometriosis is a disease that affects at least 1 in 10 women. It has also been found in people assigned female at birth or before puberty or after menopause or in unborn fetuses. It took 18 years of cascading pain for me to find out it had a name. On average, it takes nearly a decade to be diagnosed. Patients are often passed around between specialists, or often, especially in BIPOC people, patients' symptoms are ignored by health professionals. Endometriosis is a systemic inflammatory disease characterized by the presence of lesions located outside of the uterus. These lesions are different structurally and behave differently from the lining of the uterus known as the endometrium. The lesions can cause adhesions, fibrosis, and join together or destroy organs. Endometriosis develops its own nerves and blood supply. It produces inflammation and creates its own estrogen, and can be resistant to progesterone. The disease can be found anywhere in the body. It can be superficial or deep infiltrating and comes in all types of sizes and colors. It is staged between 1 and 4. However, the severity and the vast array of possible symptoms don't always correlate with disease stage or location. It can, and often does, cause symptoms throughout the month, not just when menstruating. It is mentioned in the oldest texts with inhumane treatments, and 100 years ago, it was still believed to be a wandering womb or simply hysteria. The pelvic physical therapist empowered me with information and tools to become educated about the disease, and told me that the gold standard of treatment was a diagnostic surgery with an expert specialist who knew how to widely excise all possible presentations of endometriosis. It's important to find a true specialist because there are many providers who believe they are endo experts that are in fact not. They may rely on hormones, which may help manage basic symptoms for some, but can be catastrophic for others. Hormones don't treat the lesions and can exacerbate the symptoms. These providers may excise in some areas, but not be able to excise advanced endo or excise all the endo, and they often miss identifying the endo or simply ablate, aka burn, a few superficial lesions, which is akin to trying to remove a tree from the ground by burning one leaf. They may believe endometriosis is the same as the tissue in the uterus or caused by retrograde menstruation. It's not. To make matters worse, 1 in 6 people with endometriosis have lost jobs due to the disease. And the truth is, there hasn't been enough research funding to figure out the cause of the many manifestations of endometriosis that can be found or potentially grow in every part of the body. There is no known cure. Less than 20% of OBGYNs know how to diagnose and remove endo, and most providers receive incorrect information about this life-shattering disease. I was overwhelmed. But with the help of social media, research, and the pelvic physical therapist and a loving partner as my co-pilots, I made an appointment with the closest excision specialist, who is a 5-hour drive away. My partner drove me because I had been too sick to drive for a very long time, and they sat with me while I waited to see what type of testing would be behind this door. The excision specialist listened to my story and did an internal exam using 3 fingers. With that exam, she could feel tension implying endometriosis. She ordered an MRI that found evidence of deep infiltrating endometriosis. Medical imaging, like MRIs, can help to rule in endometriosis, especially when it's deep infiltrating, but not to rule it out. The specialist wanted to operate and to include a colorectal surgeon, who we drove more hours to meet with. And finally, on Valentine's Day, we drove 4 more hours in the dark to surgery. The surgery took a few hours. When I woke up, I kept asking if they found any endometriosis. I just wanted to believe my own pain, and that the pain could be managed, and that perhaps the pain was not just in my head or my fault for being too stressed or too sensitive. They did find rectovaginal deep infiltrating endometriosis, stage 3. Some of it was clear or yellow or pink or brown. They excised the lesions from my bilateral uteral sacral ligaments, the left pelvic sidewall, the right pelvic sidewall, the right sacral ligament. Ovarian endometriomas in both ovaries were removed and covered in stem cell membranes. Deep layers in the cul-de-sac were carefully dug out. The surgeons removed retroperitoneal endometriotic fibrosis, causing distortion of the anatomy throughout my pelvis, and they mobilized the left ureter, which connects to your kidney, to remove additional adhesions. The colorectal surgeon, a cancer specialist, did not find the difficult-to-locate intestinal lesions we expected. Instead, he removed thick adhesions in between my rectum and uterus and adhesions throughout my small intestine. I had gone to dozens and dozens of doctors from nearly every specialty, a bevy of OBGYNs, a revolving door of ER visits or failed invasive testing. No one ever mentioned endometriosis or told me that pain with periods was not normal, or that penetration should never be painful until the pelvic physical therapy evaluation. Excision surgery is intense, but it also really helped. On the way back from the post-op appointment, after driving for 8 hours, someone crashed into the car, and then a few days later, the entire world began to shut down as the pandemic began to rage. I wish I could say my story ends here, and for many it does. Proper excision with a true specialist can and often is a one-time event. For me, it got more complicated. For 6 months, I worked really hard to recover from surgery and years of my body being under attack from endometriosis, and so many symptoms began to feel better, especially with access to pelvic physical therapy. And then my symptoms returned, new ones appeared, and rapidly intensified. I tried bioidentical hormones that my body rejected. The cracking, burning, flesh-stripping, stabbing, tingling, cracking, passing out rolled back in. A death sentence served chained to toilets, unable to walk, without food, as my heart and nervous system tried to escape, night after night. The surgeon ordered an MRI that showed some pelvic fluid and what looked like the return of a tiny endometrioma. She said that additional surgery wasn't an option, and I really only survived the following months by researching and questioning every recommendation from every doctor and trying to learn to trust myself. Folks with endo are often thought of as problem patients for questioning doctors, which only further adds to the complex medical trauma we experience. A year post-op, another MRI showed that the endometrioma had doubled in size. I relied on internet groups to research experts and waited months for surgical consultations out of state. There's OBGYNs who may perform ablation or a fellowship to excise endo, and then there's the real experts. With all my being, I knew there was more endo that would require one of the very few surgeons with years of experience identifying and removing advanced lesions throughout the body, mainly by themselves or with a team. I suspected I had lesions involving my intestines and my rectum and my diaphragm, but was told it was unlikely by the surgeons, whose fees range from $12,000 to $20,000 US, and it was the height of the COVID pandemic. My dad wanted to help me leave the state for surgery, but he died suddenly before he could. I spent hours every week, every day, fighting insurance and got nowhere. Access to wealth should not determine access to care, but with endometriosis, wealth can be the determinant of health. A new doctor who has endo encouraged surgery with an expert as soon as possible and helped me access pain management with suppositories and low-dose naltrexone. Pain with endometriosis should be believed and managed and provided accommodations for, but pain is often dismissed. AbbVie, the company that sells Orilissa and Lupron, spends millions of dollars to lobby decision makers and fund providers and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists who set treatment guidelines. I was desperate to eat, walk, sleep, breathe, or stay conscious when I scheduled a consultation with a surgeon across the country. His skills and experience with removing deep infiltrating endometriosis were exceptional. He was realistic about recovery, the damage advanced endo inflicts, and he listened to me. The surgeon helped me fight insurance with access to a free lawyer and an extensive letter on the medical necessity to have surgery out of state, especially for stage 4 endo, but insurance still denied me. I finally gave up on my insurance. Thanks to COVID special enrollment, I was able to switch to a grossly expensive insurance plan with national health coverage. Crowdfunding from friends and their friends, my partner, his sister, and training hard at pelvic and mental therapy made another big operation possible. The hospital approved my application for financial aid. Every hospital in the US has a different policy. And just like that, our 2-week excision surgery trip began with an illuminating pre-op appointment. I got COVID tested, and then the next day I walked down the block to surgery, thousands of miles away from home. I woke up after 6 hours, and nurses helped me advocate to stay the night and count the new surgical scars. There were 5 new surgical sites across my torso and 2 sites with strings coming out, suspending my ovaries through the abdomen. The surgeon visited my hospital room, gave me the hug I really needed, and used the whiteboard to tell me the story behind each scar. The surgeon and his assistant performed 2 diagnostic tests to inspect the uterus and the bladder for signs of adenomyosis or bladder pain syndrome. I had neither, but they were suspected in me and can be very common with endometriosis. They cleared off the top of my uterus and bladder and my fallopian tubes. For a second time, ovaries were repaired. The left ovary was stuck between the hips, and the right ovary had lesions on top and an endometrioma inside. The pelvis was stripped from the brim to the tissue that connects the cervix and the spine, a portion of the lining covering abdominal organs, the space between the colon and abdominal wall, and lesions in the anus stretching to the uterus and the rectum were all aggressively removed. 5 endo spots on the diaphragm were removed. An invasive lesion deep within the intersection of the rectum and the colon was cut out and repaired with a strong suture. A significantly invasive lesion at the base of the appendix into the pouch that connects the small intestine to the colon required a colleague of my surgeons to help remove the cecum and appendix and staple my organs closed. A few spots were discovered on my ileum, the small intestine area that was suspected to have Crohn's, but removal was just too risky for too many reasons. A few days later, pathology confirmed endometriosis. Pathology reports from my surgeries also found lesions composed of strange things like smooth muscle or mesothelial cells. The days that followed were a blissful break from stabbing. Legal cannabis helped me to reduce opioids and enhance colon motility. I could not laugh or cry or lift anything, including my arms, but inch by inch, with ample help, I made it to the post-op appointment where the wise and kind surgeon literally cut my ovaries free. I was cleared to fly home so the real rest could begin, and the flights back were really difficult, especially with COVID, but I made it home safe and sound. It's hard work to slowly come back to life. There is immense trauma after decades of assault from endometriosis. Pelvic therapy, mental therapy, suppositories, long walks, intuitive eating, stress management, a team of health providers, and rest are all essential. At 18 months post-op, my quality of life is much better than I ever thought possible. Healing is complex, individual, and non-linear. Flares and my symptoms come in waves. A lot of symptoms stop, many are less severe, and a few have come back or never went away. I just want to support myself to afford living with endometriosis. Menstrual workplace accommodations, disability benefits, and insurance coverage for adequate medical care would be really helpful. The more extensive the surgery, the longer recovery may take, which may be much longer than what is discussed. People with endometriosis may have other health conditions, and it can be a dynamic disability, and it may cause permanent damage the longer it is left in. The education for providers is not accurate. Research funding is dangerously low, and period literacy needs to be taught. My new local OBGYN did an endo fellowship, and she ordered an MRI for me. She sees an endometrioma and a nodule with fibrosis connecting my cervix to my rectum. Reoccurrence of endometriosis and missed disease are a lot less likely with expert excision, but it's still possible, especially with advanced disease. The genes involved with endometriosis are vast and vary. Personally, I think it may be different types of a disease. All forms can be life-shattering. Advanced or extrapelvic diseases are uniquely horrible. There is still no single adequate classification system for the many manifestations. Hormonal suppression, ablation, and hysterectomy are not cures. Expert excision is absolutely medically necessary disease management. It must become the standard of care. There is no cure. It's hard to explain what endometriosis is, why we need to travel or pay out of pocket for care. It's such an isolating disease to speak about with health professionals, family, friends, lovers, community, colleagues, or classmates. It can feel impossible to talk about in a world that shames us into silence about menstruation. For 20 years, the medical system failed me. I don't want my story to inspire you, but I do hope it will move you to action to help fight this war on our bodies. Let's change this together. The time is now.